At 2:14 in the morning, Savannah Hale sat on a hard plastic chair beside her mother's hospital bed, watching a monitor blink numbers that meant nothing good, and did the only thing left that she hadn't already tried. She begged. Not out loud. Not to God, though she tried that too. Somewhere around midnight, whispered into her own folded hands until the words ran out. She begged through her phone, typing and deleting the same message 4 times before she finally let herself send it. Please. I know it's been years since we talked, but I don't know who else to ask. Mom needs a procedure by Friday or the doctors say she won't make it through the month. I need $40,000 I don't have. I'm sorry to even ask. I'm just out of options. The message was meant for Thomas Weller, a distant cousin of her late husband's who'd once, years ago at a funeral, told her to call if she ever needed anything. She hadn't taken him up on it until tonight, 3 years and 1 dead husband later, sitting beside a mother whose kidneys were failing faster than any GoFundMe page could keep up with. She hit send with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking and did not notice, in her exhaustion, that autocorrect had quietly swapped 1 digit in a phone number she typed from a business card gone soft and illegible at the edges. The message did not reach Thomas Weller. It reached Damian Blake. Damian was awake at that hour the way he usually was, sitting alone in his study with a glass of scotch he wasn't drinking, working through a supply chain dispute that could wait until morning, but wouldn't let him sleep regardless. His phone buzzed once on the desk, an unknown number, and he almost ignored it entirely. Unknown numbers rarely brought him anything worth his time. He read it anyway. He read it twice. There was something in the plainness of it. No manipulation. No dramatic flourish. Just a woman apologizing for asking a question she was clearly terrified to ask that made him sit back slowly in his chair. He typed a reply before he'd fully decided to. Wrong number. But I'm sorry about your mother. What hospital? Savannah stared at her screen for a long moment, confusion cutting briefly through the exhaustion. She typed back, careful, wary of a stranger asking questions at 2 in the morning. I'm sorry, I sent this to the wrong person. You don't need to worry about it. I asked because I want to help. The reply came. Not because I need an explanation. What hospital, Savannah? She hadn't given her name. She stared at the screen, a cold, sharp unease moving through her. And then she remembered, distantly, that her name was on the message itself, signed at the bottom out of habit, the way she signed every text to someone who might not recognize the number. Still, something about the calm, unhurried certainty of the reply unsettled her more than it should have. Who is this? Someone who can pay a hospital bill without noticing it's gone. I'm not asking for anything, Savannah. I'm offering. She almost didn't answer. Every instinct she had, honed by 3 years of scraping by alone, told her that nothing free ever stayed free for long. But she looked at her mother's face, pale and slack against the pillow, and she thought about Friday and the procedure, and the $40,000 she did not have and had no way of finding by any means that didn't sound exactly like this. Too good, too strange, too sudden. St. Agnes Memorial, she typed finally. Room 412. Please, if this is real, I'll do anything. I'll pay you back somehow. I don't know how, but You don't owe me anything. The reply came. Get some sleep, Savannah. Your mother will still need you tomorrow. She did not sleep. She sat in that chair until the sun came up, watching her phone, half certain the whole exchange had been some cruel joke, or a scam, or a mistake that would simply vanish with the morning light the way most kindness from strangers eventually did. At 8 a.m., a hospital administrator knocked softly on the door of room 412 and told her, with a careful, bewildered expression, that her mother's entire outstanding balance had been paid in full overnight, and that the surgical team had already been notified to move Friday's procedure up to Wednesday. Savannah sat very still, the phone loose in her hand, and did not know how to feel anything except a fear so large it nearly swallowed the relief whole. Across the city, in a study that had gone quiet with the dawn, Damian Blake set down a glass of scotch he still hadn't touched and stared at nothing for a long time. He told himself it was simple decency. A woman in crisis, a debt he could pay without noticing the loss. Nothing more complicated than that. But some part of him, older and quieter than the version of himself that ran an empire most men feared to whisper about, had read her message 3 times before he'd ever typed a reply, and something in the plain, exhausted honesty of it had reached toward a place in his chest he'd kept carefully sealed for 5 years. He did not understand why. He only knew, sitting alone as the sun rose over a city that had no idea what he'd just done. That paying the bill was not going to be enough. He needed to see her. Damian arranged it carefully, a visit disguised as routine follow-up from the foundation that had covered her mother's bill, a private medical benefit fund Damian's organization quietly ran under a name that traced back to nothing recognizable as his own. He came to St. Agnes on Thursday afternoon, dressed down from his usual tailored precision into something closer to ordinary, dark slacks, a simple gray sweater, nothing that announced the kind of man he actually was to anyone who might recognize the cut of a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Savannah was sitting beside her mother's bed when he arrived, a paperback open and unread in her lap, her attention fixed instead on the slow, steady rhythm of the monitor now finally, blessedly, moving in the right direction. "Ems, Hale," Damian said, knocking softly at the open door. "I'm here on behalf of the foundation that covered your mother's procedure. I wanted to check in, make sure everything's proceeding smoothly." Savannah looked up, and something in her face, wary, careful, but not unkind, made Damian understand instantly why a message this honest had reached him in the first place. "You didn't have to come in person," she said. "I already tried calling the number on the paperwork to thank whoever did this. It just rang through to a voicemail box that was full. The foundation prefers to stay quiet about who benefits from it," Damian said. "But I wanted to see for myself that the money went where it was needed." Savannah studied him a moment longer than the explanation probably warranted, something in his voice, his stillness, catching at her attention in a way she couldn't name. "Her surgery went well," she said finally, gesturing toward her sleeping mother. "The doctors say if the next few weeks go the way they're hoping, she has a real chance now. A few weeks ago, I didn't think I'd ever say that sentence again." "I'm glad," Damian said, and meant it more than the careful distance of his cover story allowed him to show. He stayed longer than he intended, asking careful questions about her mother's condition, listening more than he spoke, and it was somewhere in the second hour, while Savannah reached over to smooth her mother's blanket and hummed a few absent bars of some old, half-remembered tune, that Damian felt the floor tilt beneath him. He knew that melody. He hadn't heard it in 5 years. He hadn't let himself think about it in longer than that, because the last time he'd heard someone hum those exact 5 notes, it had been a woman he'd loved enough to consider walking away from everything he'd built, a woman named Elena, who had died in a car explosion meant to kill him instead, 5 years ago this coming spring. "That song," he said, before he could stop himself. "What is it?" Savannah blinked, surprised by the sudden shift in his voice. "I don't actually know," she admitted. "I've hummed it my whole life. My mother says I used to do it as a baby, so I guess it's just something that got stuck in me somewhere." "Why?" "No reason," Damian said, too quickly, and watched something flicker across her face. Not suspicion exactly, but the particular alertness of a woman used to noticing when someone wasn't telling her the whole truth. "It's familiar. That's all." He left 20 minutes later, driving back across the city with his hands tighter on the wheel than the moment warranted, telling himself the melody was common enough. An old folk tune half the world probably knew some version of. Nothing more than coincidence dressed up as significance by a man who hadn't let himself grieve properly in 5 years. He almost believed it. He was 3 blocks from his estate when Marcus called, his voice carrying the particular flatness that meant trouble. "Boss, we have a problem. Vincent Ortiz's people have been asking questions about a woman at St. Agnes Memorial. Specifically, about who paid off a patient's bill anonymously this week." Damian's hands went very still on the wheel. "How does Ortiz know about that?" "I don't know yet," Marcus said. "But someone flagged the transaction. It's not public information, boss, which means either someone inside the foundation talked, or Ortiz has eyes somewhere close enough to notice you personally visiting a hospital room that has nothing to do with any business you'd normally have reason to be in." Damian felt something cold settle into his chest, replacing the warm, disoriented confusion the melody had stirred only 20 minutes earlier. "Find out what Ortiz wants with her," he said. "And Marcus, I want protection on that hospital room by tonight. Quiet, unmarked, nothing that draws attention. If Vincent Ortiz has decided a stranger's kindness makes an interesting weakness to exploit, I'm not giving him the chance to find out how right he is." He ended the call and sat in his car outside the estate gates for a long moment, the melody still humming faintly at the edge of his memory, refusing to fully let go. He told himself it was simple caution. A woman he'd helped, now unexpectedly at risk because of his own involvement, deserved his protection regardless of any old song stirring uncomfortable memories he'd spent 5 years trying not to examine too closely. He did not yet understand that the melody was only the first of several small, quiet things about Savannah Hale that were about to make 5 years of careful, deliberate grief considerably harder to keep sealed away. 2 weeks passed, and Damian found reasons, legitimate, careful, always deniable, to return to St. Agnes more often than any Foundation representative reasonably needed to. Savannah's mother, Ruth, improved steadily, color returning to her face in a way that made Savannah's careful composure finally, visibly ease for the first time since Damian had met her. She began speaking more freely with him during those visits, the wary distance of their first meeting softening into something closer to genuine warmth, though neither of them named it directly. "You never told me your actual name," Savannah said one afternoon, watching him from across her mother's bed while Ruth slept peacefully between them. "The Foundation paperwork just says Anonymous Benefactors Representative. That's not exactly a name." "Damian," he said after a brief hesitation. "Damian Blake." Something flickered across her face. Not recognition exactly, more a strange, fleeting unease, like a word on the tip of her tongue she couldn't quite place. "That's a nice name," she said finally, and the moment passed. Damian felt it too, though he said nothing, filing it away alongside the melody from 2 weeks earlier, another small piece of a pattern he wasn't ready to examine too closely. "Can I ask you something?" Savannah said, later that same visit, once Ruth had woken and Damian had helped her adjust the pillows behind her mother's back with a gentleness Savannah hadn't expected from a man who carried himself with such quiet, contained authority. "Why does a stranger's medical bill matter enough to you that you keep coming back to check on her? You could have just paid it and walked away." Damian was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much of the truth he was willing to hand her. "I lost someone 5 years ago," he said finally. "Someone I loved very much. I wasn't able to save her when it mattered most. I think, somewhere in the last 2 weeks, some part of me decided that saving your mother was a way of finally doing something I couldn't do for her." Savannah's expression softened, something warm and unguarded moving behind her tired eyes. "I'm sorry." "What was her name?" "Elena," Damian said quietly and watched, without quite understanding why it mattered so much, for any flicker of reaction on Savannah's face. She only nodded slowly, sympathy plain and simple in her expression, nothing more. "That's a beautiful name," she said. "I'm sorry you lost her." But later that evening, walking Damian to the elevator at the end of visiting hours, Savannah stopped mid-sentence, her hand rising unconsciously to press against the side of her neck. A small, unconscious gesture, gone as quickly as it arrived, and said, "Sorry, I don't know why I said that. Elena." It felt strange in my mouth for a second. Deja vu, I guess. Damian's chest went tight in a way he didn't examine, not yet. Not with the elevator doors already opening and Marcus waiting downstairs with news that couldn't wait until morning. He found Marcus in the hospital parking garage, tension radiating off him in a way Damian rarely saw. "Vincent Ortiz sent a message an hour ago," Marcus said, holding out his phone. "Direct boss. No more quiet questions." Damian read it. The message was short, precise, deliberately cruel in its simplicity. "I know about the housekeeper's daughter you've been visiting at St. Agnes. Interesting soft spot for a man who's never once shown weakness in 15 years. I wonder what the sick mother's chart would say if her medication schedule went missing for a day. Careful, Damian. Some debts get collected in ways you don't expect." Damian's jaw tightened, cold fury replacing the warm confusion of the last 2 weeks in an instant. "He's threatening Ruth," Damian said. "Directly." "He's threatening both of them," Marcus said. "Boss Ortiz doesn't do idle threats. If he's escalated to naming her specifically, he's already decided Savannah matters enough to you to be useful leverage. We need to move them somewhere secure tonight." Damian looked back up at the hospital's lit windows, at the room where Savannah was likely settling in for another long night beside her mother's bed, entirely unaware that a war she knew nothing about had just, without warning, found its way to her door. "Bring the car around," Damian said. "I'm not explaining this to her through a phone call. She deserves to hear it from me directly, and she deserves the chance to say no to whatever protection I offer." He turned back toward the hospital entrance, already rehearsing, in the cold silence of the parking garage, exactly how he intended to tell a woman who thought she'd only ever met a stranger's kindness that the same kindness had just made her a target in a war she'd never once chosen to be part of. Savannah did not scream, did not panic, when Damian sat across from her in the small family lounge outside her mother's room and explained, as plainly as he could, exactly what kind of man he actually was. She listened in silence, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her face carefully composed in the way Damian had come to recognize as her particular armor, the same composure she'd worn the first night he'd texted her, apologizing for a message never meant to reach him. "So the foundation," she said slowly, once he'd finished. "It's not really a foundation. It's you. Your money. Yes. And you're what exactly? Some kind of businessman with enemies who threaten sick old women in hospital beds? I run an organization most people would call organized crime," Damian said, refusing to soften it, refusing to let her make a decision about trusting him based on anything less than the full truth. "I have enemies who understand that hurting the people I care about is more effective than trying to hurt me directly. 2 weeks ago, you were a stranger who sent a message to the wrong number. Tonight, because of my own carelessness and how I approached helping you, you and your mother are both targets." Savannah absorbed this in silence, and Damian watched, with something between dread and admiration, as fear gave way slowly to something harder and more decisive behind her tired eyes. "What do you need us to do?" she said finally. "I need you both somewhere secure," Damian said. "My estate, tonight if possible. Full medical staff on site for your mother, security around the clock. I know it's an enormous thing to ask of a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore," Savannah said quietly. "Not after 2 weeks of watching you sit with my mother like she actually mattered to you." She looked at him steadily. "I'm scared, Damian. But I'm more scared of what happens if I say no and something happens to her, because I was too proud to accept help." They moved Ruth that same night, an ambulance arranged quietly through channels Damian controlled completely. Savannah riding beside her mother's gurney with one hand wrapped tightly around Ruth's fingers the entire drive. The estate swallowed them both into a wing Damian had prepared in less than 3 hours. A private medical suite for Ruth, a guest room for Savannah 2 doors down, guards positioned at every entrance with the quiet, controlled efficiency of men who had done this exact thing before, for reasons Savannah didn't yet understand and Damian didn't yet explain. It was past midnight when Damian found Savannah standing alone on the estate's back terrace, wrapped in a borrowed coat too large for her frame, staring out at grounds she couldn't fully see in the dark. "You should be resting," he said, coming to stand beside her. "I can't," Savannah admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I think about that message. Ortiz, your enemy. I keep thinking, if I just typed the right number 2 weeks ago, none of this would be happening. If you typed the right number," Damian said quietly, "your mother might not have survived the week. I don't think either of us gets to know, sitting here, whether the wrong number was a mistake or something else entirely." Savannah looked at him, something warm and uncertain moving behind her exhausted eyes. "Do you believe in things like that? Fate, or whatever you'd call it?" "I didn't," Damian said. 5 years ago, I stopped believing in very much at all." He paused, something careful and unguarded entering his voice. "The last 2 weeks have made me reconsider." The moment stretched between them, close and quiet, the cold night air doing nothing to dispel the warmth building in the small space separating them. Damian's hand rose, almost without his permission, to brush a strand of hair back from her face, and Savannah did not step away. "Damian," she said softly, and he could hear, in the single syllable of his own name, an invitation she hadn't fully decided to give yet. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to stop him, and she did not. The kiss was brief, careful, both of them pulling back at the same moment as though some old instinct in each of them recognized exactly how much this single choice was about to change. Damian's hand had drifted, in the closeness of the moment, to rest lightly at the side of her neck, and it was there, in the dim porch light, that his fingers brushed against something small and raised beneath the collar of her borrowed coat. He went very still. "What is that?" he said quietly, already reaching to move the fabric aside before some old, buried instinct fully understood what he was about to find. Before Savannah could answer, before Damian's fingers could confirm the shape his mind had already impossibly begun to recognize, the terrace door swung open behind them and Marcus stepped out, his face grim in the porch light. "Boss, you need to come inside right now. We just intercepted a call. Ortiz isn't planning to wait." The interruption cost Damian the answer for less than an hour. An hour spent coordinating perimeter security with Marcus while every instinct in him screamed to go back to that terrace and finish what his hand had already discovered. But by the time he found Savannah again, seated on the edge of her guest room bed with Ruth finally settled and sleeping down the hall, the question had not softened at all. "You went very still," Savannah said quietly before he'd said a word. "On the terrace, right before Marcus interrupted us. What did you feel?" Damian crossed the room slowly and knelt in front of her, his hands trembling in a way he hadn't allowed since the week he'd buried an empty casket 5 years ago. "May I?" he said, gesturing toward the collar of her shirt, and Savannah, some old instinct in her own chest already tightening with an unnamed anticipation, nodded slowly. He drew the fabric aside gently, and there, at the base of her neck, small and faded with time but unmistakable, was a tattoo he had watched being inked into this exact spot on a woman's skin nearly 6 years ago. A crescent moon wrapped around a single 5-pointed star, a symbol she'd chosen herself, laughing, telling him it represented every promise she intended to keep to him for the rest of her life. "Where did you get this?" Damian said, his voice barely holding together. Savannah's hand rose to touch it, an old, unconscious gesture she'd made 1,000 times without ever once questioning why. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've had it as long as I can remember having any real memories at all. My uncle told me I got it before an accident, 6 years ago. A car accident. I was in a coma for 2 weeks. I woke up with almost no memory of the year before it happened. My uncle said it was safer after, if I didn't try too hard to dig up what I couldn't remember. He moved us to a new city. Changed my legal name back to my birth name instead of the nickname I'd apparently been going by. I never questioned it. I didn't have any memories worth fighting to keep." Damian's whole body had gone cold, 7 years of grief reorganizing itself violently around a truth he'd never once let himself consider. "What was the nickname?" he said, though some part of him already knew. Savannah frowned slightly, reaching for a memory that had never quite belonged to her the way memories should. "Elena," she said slowly. "My middle name. My uncle said everyone used to call me that before. I don't know why I stopped." Damian closed his eyes, 5 years of careful, deliberate grief cracking wide open in a single, devastating instant. "Elena," he said, "was the name of the woman I loved. The one I told you about. The one I believed died in a car explosion 5 years ago on a road outside the city, in an attack meant to kill me instead of her." Savannah went very still, understanding arriving in slow, disorienting pieces. "That's not possible." "Your tattoo?" Damian said, his voice breaking now, all his careful composure finally fully gone. "I watched you get it. I was there. We chose the design together, in a small shop 3 blocks from an apartment we shared for 2 years before everything fell apart." He took her hands in both of his, shaking now in a way he made no effort to hide. "Savannah, I don't think you're someone who reminds me of Elena. I think you are Elena. I think whoever put you in that car 5 years ago, whoever your uncle was protecting you from, made sure you disappeared so completely that even I believed you were gone." Savannah pulled her hands back slowly, her whole body trembling, 5 years of unexplained gaps and unnamed fears suddenly, terribly, threatening to make sense. "I don't remember you," she whispered. "I don't remember any of this. If what you're saying is true, I lost an entire year of my life, and I have no idea who I even was during it." "I know," Damian said softly. "I'm not asking you to remember all at once. I'm only asking you to let me help you find out the truth, the same way I've been trying to help you these last 2 weeks without understanding why some part of me already recognized you." Savannah stared at him, 5 years of quiet, careful grief on both their faces meeting in a small guest room that suddenly felt far too small to hold everything that had just, impossibly, been revealed. "If I'm really her," she said slowly, "then someone worked very hard to make sure I never found my way back to you. And I need to understand why, before I can let myself believe any of this is real." The truth, when it finally surfaced, came from Ruth herself, awake, lucid, and finally strong enough the following morning to answer questions she had clearly been dreading for 5 years. "Your uncle didn't lie to protect you from strangers," Ruth said quietly, sitting up in her hospital bed while Savannah and Damian stood on either side of her, both of them braced for whatever came next. "He lied to protect you from Damian's world. There was an explosion 5 years ago, meant for Damian. You were in the car instead, on your way to meet him. My brother, your uncle, worked hospital security back then. He was the first person to reach you before anyone from either side even knew you'd survived. Why didn't he just tell Damian I was alive? Savannah said, her voice tight. Because 2 men showed up at that hospital within hours, asking specific, careful questions about a woman matching your description, Ruth said. Men connected to whoever set that explosion, still trying to confirm the job was finished. My brother panicked. He believed, rightly or wrongly, that if word got out you'd survived, whoever wanted you dead would simply try again, and that the only way to actually keep you safe was to erase every trace connecting you back to Damian Blake's world entirely. Damian's jaw tightened, old fury finding a target it had waited 5 years to identify. Vincent Ortiz. Your uncle never confirmed a name, Ruth said carefully. But he told me once, years ago, that the men asking questions worked for someone who wanted your territory badly enough to eliminate you through the person closest to you instead of risking a direct attack. It fit precisely. Vincent Ortiz's decade-long campaign for territory, his willingness now to threaten Ruth's medication as leverage, the particular, patient cruelty of a man who had once tried exactly this same tactic and simply waited 5 years for another opportunity to finish it. Marcus confirmed it within the day, cross-referencing old case files against new evidence with a speed that told Damian his organization had, without ever fully realizing it, been circling the true culprit behind Elena's disappearance for years without connecting the final piece. The confrontation, when it came, was swift and decisive. Ortiz's operation dismantled not through violence alone, but through evidence Savannah herself provided, a fragmented memory surfacing under gentle questioning that placed Ortiz's own driver at the scene of the original explosion, a detail buried so deep in her damaged memory that even she hadn't known she was carrying it until Damian asked the right question at exactly the right moment. I remembered his voice, she told Damian quietly, once it was over, once federal authorities had taken custody of evidence that would end Ortiz's operation permanently. I didn't even know I still had that memory. It took you asking, believing there was something left inside me worth digging for, to finally let it surface. Ruth's recovery continued steadily in the weeks that followed, strong enough by early spring to sit in the garden at Ravenwood without assistance, watching her daughter with the particular quiet satisfaction of a mother who had spent 5 years carrying a secret she'd hoped, desperately, she would never have to reveal. Damian found Savannah in that same garden on a warm evening in late spring, sitting beneath an old oak tree, her fingers absently tracing the small tattoo at her neck the way she'd done 1,000 times without understanding why it mattered. I don't remember everything, she said, as he settled beside her. I probably never will. Whole pieces of who I was with you are just gone. I don't know if that's something you can actually live with, loving someone who can't give you back the exact person you lost. I'm not trying to get her back, Damian said quietly. I spent 5 years grieving a woman I couldn't save. I don't want to spend the rest of my life trying to resurrect her out of someone who's already standing in front of me, whole and real and choosing to be here anyway. He took her hand gently. I love you, Savannah. Not because you might be Elena underneath. Because you sat beside your dying mother at 2 a.m. and typed the most honest, humble message I've ever read, to a man you didn't even mean to reach. Because you chose to trust me with your mother's life before you had any real reason to. Because every single thing I've come to love about you these last months, I've loved without needing a 5-year-old memory to explain why. Savannah's eyes filled, something in her chest finally, fully releasing a fear she hadn't realized she was still carrying. Then ask me, she said softly. Not her. Me. Ask me for something real. Damian reached into his jacket and drew out a small velvet box, worn at one corner in a way that told Savannah, before he even opened it, that this was not a ring purchased in the last few months. This was hers, he said quietly. Elena's. I never gave it to her. I was going to, the night the explosion happened. I've carried it for 5 years, telling myself I was keeping a promise to someone who was gone. He opened the box and looked at her steadily. I'm not asking you to keep that promise. I'm asking you to make a new one with me as exactly who you are now. Savannah looked at the ring, then at him. 5 years of loss and 2 months of impossible, unlikely rediscovery settling into something that finally, completely felt like peace. Yes, she said, and meant every part of it. Not the woman she'd once been, not a memory neither of them could fully reclaim, but a choice made freely, in a garden full of spring light, by two people who had found their way back to each other through nothing more than a wrong number and a stranger's honest desperation. Some loves are lost to violence and fear and years of silence. But sometimes, if the honesty is real enough and the second chance is brave enough to take, love finds its way home anyway, not through the person someone used to be, but through the person they chose, deliberately and completely, to become. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe for more emotional mafia romance stories, and share it with someone who believes love can survive even the years we can't remember. Do you think Savannah should try to recover her missing memories? Or is it enough that she and Damian are choosing each other now?